About 6 months after my brother's life sentence he was given his life sentence at his sentencing hearing, I got a call from a guy in California. He said his name was Bill Babbitt. Meant nothing to me. He had seen me on TV, and he said, David, I think you might be the only person in the world who understands what I'm going through now. And when I heard his story, I realized it was probably true. It turned out that in 1980, many years earlier, Bill Babbitt had turned in his own brother. And again, the media played a part in this. He had read an article in the front page of the Sacramento Bee about an elderly woman who had been beaten by an intruder, who had died of a heart attack as a result of the trauma brought on by this beating. But it was still a high-profile crime because the victim was elderly, so vulnerable, and because the crime had occurred in what was thought to be a safe community. Bill reads subsequent articles. At first he's thinking, oh, I hope they catch this guy because his mother lived alone. And then within a few days he begins to realize maybe his brother's the person responsible. He and his wife go to the Sacramento Police Department. They report their suspicions, and at that point they say, this isn't going to be a death penalty case, is it? Because I want to tell you, Manny isn't like some evil person. He's seriously damaged from his experience in Vietnam. And he went on to tell his brother's experience in Vietnam. His brother had dropped out of school in the 6th grade, could not read or write, began watching news reports of the conflict in Vietnam, and suddenly had a purpose in life. He felt, you know, there's something I can do. I could fight for my country. He tries to become a Marine unsuccessfully because he can't pass the test. He can't read or write. He goes once. He goes twice. He goes back to the recruiter's office the 3rd time, at which point a friendly recruiter says, son, I could tell you really, really want to be a Marine. Let me help you. So he fed him the answers. Manny Babbitt became a Marine. A few months later, he ends up at the Battle of Khe Sanh. An American base in the middle of the jungle is surrounded by something like 10,000 Viet Cong soldiers. There's mortar shells falling every 6 seconds for 77 days. At least 1,000 Marines are killed. Manny Babbitt's in the midst of it. He gets a piece of shrapnel that penetrates his skull. They actually think he's dead. He lost consciousness. They threw this 18-year-old kid in the cargo hold of a helicopter, evacuating dead bodies from Vietnam. He comes to, and he's swimming in gore. They patch him up. He ends up doing 2 tours of duty, 5 major campaigns in Vietnam. He comes back to the States after 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it was, and he's a mess. His marriage falls apart. He becomes a street person. He ends up living in a cardboard box on the streets of Providence, Rhode Island. He eventually ends up in a state mental institution, which was a hellhole of a mental institution called Bridgewater State Hospital. Spends three years there, is heavily medicated, tries to kill himself multiple times. At this point, they don't even have a diagnosis called PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. That was to come later. They diagnose him with schizophrenia. After 3 years in this mental institution, his brother Bill in California gets a call from one of the staff there saying, we're looking for a family option for your brother. Would you be willing to open your home for him? So Bill says yes. Of course, he's my brother. Well, Manny Babbitt was released from Bridgewater State Hospital without medication, without a prescription for medication, without a referral to psychiatric services, without a discharge plan. His discharge plan was a bus ticket to California, as much to say, he's your problem now. 6 weeks later, this awful crime happens. Bill Babbitt's in the police station saying, this isn't a death penalty case, is it? And the police say, oh, by no means. You know, your brother's obviously very ill. He needs help. He's going to have to be locked up, but we'll see to it that he gets the help he needs. Bill Babbitt doesn't realize it's a death penalty case until he goes to his brother's arraignment, and the district attorney says she's seeking the death penalty against the monster. Okay, he's a monster now. He's a thug now. No mention of his war record, of his mental problems. My brother had an all-white jury. Bill Babbitt's brother had an all-white jury, the difference being that Bill and his brother are African-American. Bill Babbitt's brother had a court-appointed attorney, now get this, who had never tried a criminal case before. He was drunk every day of the trial. He later was disbarred. Manny Babbitt gets sentenced to death. Bill waits 18 years. He thinks, the death penalty isn't made for people like his brother. This is a mistake. With these appeals, they're going to catch it. Well, they don't catch it. And at the time he's calling me, his brother's appeals have run out. He said, David, I don't know if I can live with this. But the more I hear about this case, I think this is crazy. This can't be happening in America. This is impossible. If California, of all places. And we actually got this idea that we would, my wife and I, that we would save Manny Babbitt's life. Talk about naive, how naive we were. But we entered into a campaign. We connected with Manny Babbitt's attorneys. And I thought, we have remarkable connections with the media. I mean, we have letters from every name you can imagine who wanted interviews with us. Well, now we'll give them those interviews. I called at least 3 big names, people that you would all know. And their first reaction was, wow, this is a remarkable story. I talked about the differences in our cases, the similarities in our cases, putting them side by side. What's the difference here? Okay, part of the difference is race, it might be class, but certainly it's not justice. My brother was in Harvard when Manny Babbitt was in Vietnam. My brother killed 3 people. Manny Babbitt assaulted one woman who died of a heart attack while in the midst of a flashback to his war service. I mean, what's the equity here? Well, a mysterious thing happened within a day or two. In each occasion, I got a call back from this well-known name saying, I'm puzzled. I thought this was a big story, but my producer just doesn't think so. And what happened once, it could be just an opinion. Happens twice, it happens a third time. You're beginning to see a pattern here. They did not want to touch the story. And of course, the question is, why did they not want to touch the story? Mike Wallace actually gave us a second chance to go. We flew Bill in from California. We went to the studios, CBS studios here in New York. We sat down with Mike and other people involved with the program. We were pitching the story. And then another thing you have to remember about the media, somebody rushes into the room and says, oh, watch the TV, come and watch the TV. We all go and watch the TV. What's happening? Columbine. And Mike says, I'm sorry. All our energy is going to go to cover this story now. We can't give any to this particular issue, this particular case. Now, you might think this could have a happy ending. It should have a happy ending. At this point, Manny actually has great attorneys, but this is now in the realm of politics. Bill Babbitt ends up going to San Quentin prison, ironically, on his brother's 50th birthday, and watches his brother be put to death by lethal injection. The victim's family is also there. They have chairs. Bill has to stand, and there's a guard watching him so he doesn't do something. I went to the funeral in Wareham, Massachusetts. That's where the Babbitt family had originated from. And it's May of the year. It's like this beautiful springtime with like flowers blossoming. Everything about this scene says life, life, life. Isn't it great to be alive? Except here we are in a graveyard. And there's a flag-draped coffin. And there's a little family group. There's a few Marines in like tattered uniforms. It was like the only group that really got the injustice, that understood the level of injustice that was happening here. Some of them came to me and says, David, I've had flashbacks. I could have done what Manny did. Anyway, in the center of this little family group, I'm seeing Bill and his mother, and seeing that she's like about the same age as my mother, I think a year younger. The same height as my mother, just a little bit under 5 feet tall, and Bill has his arm around her trying to comfort her. And the priest is saying words, intended to be comforting, but at some point, Mrs. Babbitt's legs kind of buckle, and she starts falling and wailing, my son, and Bill here is trying to hold her up. And I can't imagine the burden he's carrying at this point, the guilt, the sorrow, the sense of injustice and victimization. I'm standing a little bit apart and kind of looking at that scene, and what I'm seeing in Bill and his mother could have been me and my mother. But it wasn't, and I know why it wasn't, Was it any one thing? Well, we were lucky in lots of ways, but we were also white. We also had all this friendly media attention. We had a chance to tell our story. We brought it to the public.